Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio. You are about to join a frequency that will open your mind, expand your heart, and activate your spirit. Thank you for joining Kelly Meehan, Spirit Baby Medium and Master Energy Therapist. Kelly believes in the power of the Spirit Baby. She speaks with babies in spirit before life, in the womb, and after life. She supports, teaches, and guides others to tune into the intuitive and mystical parts of life for greater wisdom. Join her in meeting your soul baby and build your connection and relationship with deep love and trust. Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio with your host, Spirit Baby Medium, Kelly.
Welcome to episode 68, August 23rd, 2019, Supporting Conscious Birthing and the Forgotten Organ, the Placenta. What does a full-spectrum doula do for the individual baby and family? How can birth be a conscious experience of body and spirit? What do you do with the placenta after birth? How can the placenta support mother and child? I have a special guest, Jamie Satori. Hi.
Hi, Kelly. How are you?
Great, and I love this. We were just talking a little bit before. We have such nice conversations here, and I was just saying, how did we meet and how do we connect? And it's always funny how Facebook bridges the birth communities together, and we're probably kind of secretly spying on each other, seeing our lives and our deep wordings and insights about birth and death. But I'd like to introduce more about Jamie. Jamie Satori is a traveling birth, bereavement, and postpartum doula, holistic childbirth educator, and aspiring death doula. Her personal philosophy is both cerebral and somatic, subjective and objective. It is a marriage of ancient wisdom and modern science with a special focus on the energetic dynamics and spiritual growth that accompany the childbearing years. As a servant in these spaces, she vows to follow others into the wilderness of their souls. Jamie currently works and lives between Costa Rica and Northeast Florida, and her partner and children finding places to serve from her heart. Her work focuses on reestablishing ritual in parenting, cultivating community, and activating the magical parts of ourselves that are much needed in these pilgrimages of the soul. Thank you, Jamie, for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel honored.
Oh, wonderful. So there's so many things I want to ask you. I know we were just kind of like going through that because I do feel like, why don't we just first share to people, what is a full spectrum doula?
Okay. So I think, like I said, that there are different ideas on what a full spectrum doula is, but what it is for me is to walk with a new family, an expecting family, through their entire childbearing year. And sometimes that's not always applicable with clients. Sometimes we meet during late pregnancy. And in that case, I would walk them through and really stay with them through the bulk of their postpartum experience. There's many different professions in the birth world that are focused kind of solely on one aspect of like one leg of the birth world, like maybe prenatal or the birth experience or just postpartum. And I am working in all of those areas. So for me, I'm also working in bereavement because life and death, they come hand in hand. They're two sides of the same coin, if you would accept that as my experience. And even whenever, there's no infant death or maternal death, there is still kind of a life, like a death birth process that we go through as birthing people and as families as a unit, where, our identity changes and parts of it dies and parts of it is reborn. So what I'm doing is I'm working not only with the physical aspect of birth, but also with the energetic and the emotional and mental aspect of birth and what it brings up during the childbearing year in regards to the birthing parent's own childhood and things that were not healed or different aspects of their life, their young life, and the developing minds that maybe were not heard or seen. I found that during the childbearing year, all of those things are kind of dredged up, and the spirit baby is saying, hey, mom and dad, or mom and mom, or dad and dad, how can you best support me? And let me show you what I need you to look at. So when I'm working with families, we're really working on all of those different layers.
I love that you say that as looking at the family, because I love doulas. I love doulas. I love midwives. I feel like every, hospital, every home birth in the world, there should just be automatically a doula there. Like, this makes so much sense. And, looking at the whole family involved in that, there's so much energy. Of course, you're there to be with the birthing, person. But at the same time, there could be partner in that. There could be relatives. There could be siblings. And, I feel like, and you probably may agree or disagree, I don't know. I feel like in our culture, it's more like there's such a separation. It's like the patient, and then everybody else is like second. Like they're not a part of this kind of collective or what's being built.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's not really a unit mindset there. And so I think that that's really important, especially when ushering in a soul into this world, because they're not going to be just meeting one person. Sometimes they are, but generally there's another support person around that they are feeling connected to as well.
This makes me think of, you said so many really important, powerful things, and I kind of want to touch on a little bit of everything. It's like, there's so much but I also do want to talk about that placenta piece, because I feel like, unless you're like in the birth community, people don't really understand the placenta. I know it's called the forgotten organ. It's a part of the sacral chakra. There's all these really powerful spiritual connections with the placenta, that it is this organ, and that somehow after birth, that some women, it's hospital waste, or it's taken away, or people, they take it and they bury it under a tree, I've heard, or encapsulation, or eating it. Can you tell us more about, what is this, where is this movement of the placenta? Is it, where, I don't even know if you know that, like, where did this begin, or is it something, how does that work?
Yeah. So the placenta has long been revered as highly nutritious and life-giving. And the place that we first see it logged down in history is in traditional Chinese medicine. And so in Chinese culture today, you actually see there's placenta shots that are given, oftentimes to men, because they believe so deeply in the life-giving and youth-giving and nutrient-dense properties of the placenta. So it's very common over in China and other countries. It's called placentophagy. So the placentophagy, which is the consumption of the placenta, is really common in Eastern culture. When the medical model kind of took over the reins of the birth world in the Western culture, it also started kind of discarding the placenta as biohazardous waste. And that really robs some of the slowness and sweetness that's meant to accompany the postpartum period. And whenever I talk to clients, or when I teach classes about placentas, because I offer just informational, like, community classes about what a placenta is, even like home birth moms are like, I never really touched my placenta, or I never talked about my placenta with my midwife or my OB. Nobody's really creating any conversation around it. It's just thrown away, and yeah, maybe people bury it or they consume it, but even with their consumption and their ritual, they really don't know a whole lot about it. So when I first learned placenta encapsulation, I was taught the traditional Chinese method, which is kind of what we were just talking about, where you first see placenta consumption coming from. I don't teach that anymore whenever I train other encapsulators, and I don't practice that because I'm not a traditional Chinese practitioner. So I can't really offer that without knowing that medicine. But I do believe in really deeply educating expecting families, including siblings, about what the placenta is and how selfless it is, and all of the different functions that it has and what it can offer women or birthing persons in their vulnerable postpartum time. And, in a perfect world, we would not have to ingest our placenta. But the reality is that we have such a flaky postpartum support system, especially in the United States and in many different countries, that birthing people really do need to ingest their placenta in a lot of cases, because they need that extra hormonal support and that extra healing support, because they're not getting it anywhere else. And that's a huge problem with our healthcare. So even as a placenta professional and somebody who, I create a lot of business around that, in my mind, a perfect world, we would just be creating ritual around it and not eating it, Some people will say that, some naysayers will say, well, we live in such a world where we have access to so many nutrients that we,
Oh, I lost you again. You were just talking about how the placenta. You talked about how our culture looks at it, right? Is how it's a waste or what is the purpose that it's serving, and that's where it gets a little like, okay, what is this placenta? Like, what, are we throwing it away? Are we keeping it? And I loved how you were talking about that postpartum time. Like, even if you're not like ingesting it, using it as a ritual, it's not even looked at that way. And, and it's true. Like, I only could speak from American culture, whereas like, yeah, what is postpartum? It's just like, all right, let's move on. Like, let's go. And it brings me back to what I said earlier, like birth doulas, postpartum doulas. It should just be automatic for people. Like our government should pay for that, like this. Do we want to raise like healthy, conscious, whole people? I feel like we do, right? And so giving those pieces. But tell me more, about the placenta and its beautiful properties.
Okay, so I'm not sure where we left off, but we'll just talk a little bit about the placenta. The placenta is acting kind of like the endocrine system of birth. So it's the hormonal center of birth. It carries messages from baby to mom. Like if mom is developing a virus and baby creates antibodies and sends back to mom through the placenta. And there's this misconception that the placenta is like storing toxins, but really it's acting as a filter and as a like a unit that just transfers waste out of the baby and through the mother's bloodstream. So there's a little bit of a misconception about whether or not placentas are holding on to all of those toxins and they're safe for consumption or not. And the truth is they're not holding on to them. They're processing them back out through the mother's bloodstream. If they were holding on to them, it would be extremely toxic to the mother's body in general. And the placenta actually has a maternal and a fetal side. And, the baby gets all of their blood from the mother. Am I still with you? I want to check with you.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. The baby gets all of their blood supply from the mother, but their blood supply is never mixed. And that's because the placenta has a barrier within it that is taking from the mother and giving to the baby, but it's creating the baby's own source. So that's a really beautiful, like really magical property of the placenta in the first place. And on the maternal side of the placenta, the blood kind of sits there in pools and waits to be used for the baby. It also, so it also acts as all the baby's nutrients. Everything is coming through the placenta, through the umbilical cord. And when we're talking about ingesting the placenta is a powerhouse of nutrients and hormones and basic compounds that are really, really important for a new mother. So it's got a whole lot of oxytocin, which, as you may know, oxytocin is important not only in the birth process, but also in the bonding process with the baby or babies. It's called the love hormone. And it has estrogen, which is helpful in healing and mood stabilization. It's got its own opioid-releasing hormones, which helps with healing after birth and pain relief. It's got human placental lactogen in it, which is helpful for creating quality and quantity of breast milk. And it's also got HCG, which is, as most of us know, is the hormone that it's human chorionic gonadotropin is the scientific name for it, but it's what makes us get that second line on the pregnancy test. So those are just a few of all the many things that are involved in the placenta. So when we ingest it, we're getting all of those vital nutrients, not to mention loads of iron and loads of other hormones and basic compounds.
Oh, I love how you shared all that, because I don't know that much about the placenta. I just know a little bit here and there, and I know that I had my placenta for my second birth because it was a home birth, and I felt like my first birth I tried to get it, but I had a hospital home birth transfer, and they were not very nice, and I didn't know my rights, then it was a little different, but this time it was really fun to see the placenta. It was a little intense too, I'm not gonna lie. I was like, whoa, like what is this? Like
yeah.
Baby's living in this sac that's so red, and then I loved looking at the umbilical cord, especially when Forrest, when my son came out, my husband helped him out as the midwives let him do that. Because there was no way I was able to do that. I was in my own world. But I loved holding him and looking at this cord. It was like opalescent pearly cord, right? The umbilical cord, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like attached to me still, and I'm just in exuberance right now because I'm holding him and he's coughing up all his good stuff. And I remember delivering the placenta, which felt like nothing compared to the birth. I was like, I will deliver 20 more placentas
yeah.
just to let God go through the birth.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cakewalk after the baby.
Yeah. I was like, I barely even felt it. It wasn't, because people were like, oh, but then you have to deliver the placenta, and it's not, and I'm like, that was not intense compared to that body that had to work its way through. And so that was really, it was nice to see, and I know it was interesting because the midwives, they go into the sink, and they actually said they were looking to see if it was old or not old. I guess they can tell how long baby's been in there by the placenta, which was fascinating. I had no idea, because I went over 41 weeks, but the placenta did not show that it was over 41 weeks, which I thought was interesting too. So, because baby knows when, and so, but I got to eat them, and I finished them all pretty quick. But I actually just recently found, I totally forgot, I left it in the cabinet because I wanted it to be dark, was I had made for me was like a tincture, right? But I'm like, what do I do with this now? I don't know. And someone's like, oh, you just take it, maybe you feel like PMS or something. I'm like, I don't even know. It's so sacred to me. I'm like, what do I do with this magic potion now that I'm like, almost 3 years from birth? What do people do when they have all their stuff? Like, do they eat it later or like save it?
Yeah. There are many women who will make a tincture and then they'll keep it for menopause. Because it gives them an extra boost, whenever their body is really regulating to this new kind of state of being. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really beautiful. And essentially, I always suggest that people take their whole placenta. It's going to have optimal functioning when you take it immediately post-birth or as soon as you can. But there's really nothing lost if you take a piece of placenta, whether it's dehydrated powder or a raw piece of placenta, and put it in 100 proof alcohol and let it steep. There's nothing lost there to be able to take it again. It's like a little magical potion from a magical organ that you can take later on, because the truth is postpartum is not 6 weeks, and it's not 3 months. And it's often longer than 2 years. My personal idea of postpartum, especially when I'm training students to work with placentas, is that postpartum is as long as our bodies are still supporting our children. So if you're nursing or if you're still waking up all night, then our bodies are still our children. And postpartum, some people will say postpartum is forever, but.
I love that you said that. I really want to really make that energy really strong, those that are tuning in. Looking at this postpartum piece, that it is more than 6 weeks, that, it's different for each person. And the 6 weeks feels like so much pressure, because I know after 6 weeks, I still felt ungrounded. Like I was floating on a cloud somewhere. I'm like, where am I? And I have this little being now stuck on my nipple all the time. And I was like, there's no automatic line. And I feel like we see that in books, and it's like, 6 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 weeks. But I felt like even for me, the first time was probably a good year, maybe even more. Yeah. And then the second time was a little different. It definitely felt more than 3 months, definitely, probably I think there's close to a year is my postpartum energy. To try to get back into, being grounded into a certain rhythm and I guess if you were saying nursing, I'm still kind of nursing, so then I would be 3 years postpartum.
Yeah.
Oh man,
Absolutely.
that sounds long. But,
yeah, you know, I think it's evidence-based to assume that if it takes 9 to 10 months to cultivate and grow a life, that it takes at least that long, if not much longer, based on the culture and the you know, the healthcare that we're working with, to reintegrate back into our own bodies as one unit, you know. And I think that is a huge, it really does it doesn't do much for people whenever there's this 6 month or 6 week, 3 month mark. And I think that those are milestones, but I think that there's a little bit of a misconception about what milestones are and endpoints, you know. So when we ingest our placenta, it really, and I'm not sure, I think we got cut off when I was talking about this earlier. You can stop me if I'm wrong, if you heard me. But there's this idea that, you know, I feel like in a perfect world, I think we may have talked about this, in a perfect world, we wouldn't need to eat our placentas, you know. So tell me, did you hear me say this earlier?
Yeah, I did hear you talk about that was in there.
Right. Okay. Yeah, in a perfect world, we wouldn't need to eat our placentas. But since we're dealing with such a lack of postpartum support and lack of resources, and we're all kind of living in these little boxes separated from each other, and there's no tribal unit or real community, that, you know, looking to our placenta is a very natural way to say, you know, hey, I need some assistance healing, and to get healing from the very organ that was meant to give us that. And we see that in animals too. You know, we see with mammals all the time. Mammals eat their placentas for basically 2 reasons. One is so that other animals don't smell it, and then like predators don't smell the raw meat and then confine them. And the other is because they just expended a huge amount of hormone and chemicals and vital nutrients to give birth. And so again, it's evidence-based to say that, you know, we need to get those back. And there's not all of us have access to real nutrients that isn't depleted and from chemicals and environmental toxins. So I think that eating our placenta is something that's not only revolutionary, but really vital for our entire human race.
What about, you know, as you're saying that, I'm thinking in my mind, I'm going, what about cesarean births and vaginal births and intervention births? Does that cross into, like, if there's, you know, epidurals and things, is that getting into the tissues of the placenta? Are we ingesting that? How does that work? Or even cesarean, I'm sure it's a little different. What is your experience with that?
So there is no, it doesn't make a difference whether or not you have an epidural or not, simply because the placenta is acting the whole time that you're pregnant. So in the birth process as well, it's acting as a protective filter against bacteria, and it's acting as waste removal, and it's acting as a barrier between the mother and the child's blood supply. And so, like I said, it's not holding on to all of those toxins. It's really just filtering them out, you know. And I think that especially with interventions in birth, it's even more important for a mom to have, or a birthing person to have, that extra support afterwards. Because even if they're expecting it, major surgery and tools, unnatural tools being used in the birth process, even if it's for a really good medical reason, is often something that is not really expected, and it leaves a kind of trauma loop going on in the mother. So I think it's important either way, and I found that really it's those people that are seeking it out even more. And because of all the hormonal and chemical contents of the placenta, like I said, like iron, HCG, there's also thyroid stimulating hormone, and that regulates the thyroid glands, and it helps recover from high stress situations. So again, that's so important for somebody who's just had a cesarean. The placental opioid enhancing factor, which is it's a long word for what we would say POEF. It motivates the body's natural opioid receptors and decreases pain, and it like lifts your mood, which is extremely beneficial whenever you're healing with a cesarean scar. prolactin, and it actually has interferon too, which that triggers the immune system to fight infection. So all of those things, there's probably a list of at least 10 components that are in the placenta that are tailored just for the healing of the mother.
I love that. I tell women that are local. I don't see a lot of local people, but, when I do, and they're moving into pregnancy, it's I always say, look into placenta encapsulation. And there's so many birth workers here that do it. I feel like it's an accompaniment to a lot of doulas and birth educators. And it's weaving it all together, right? It's there's not, I almost feel like there's not just birth doula anymore. It's what is the many things, the many sides of this birth professional, as you are, that offers all these different pieces, from birth to the postpartum, the education. But I also want to speak about here is your aspiring death doula work. And I know you've had your own experience around loss, but even, we don't talk much in baby world about abortion, miscarriage, stillbirth. These things happen and they're real, and women and couples need support around that. Talk about this aspiring death doula that you are. Are you in a training currently?
Yeah, so I actually trained with the Institute with Amy Wright Glenn. I think we spoke about that before, with the Institute of Birth, Breath, and Death, and which was incredible. I read her book, Holding Space, and I think you've read it too. And it's all about companioning through the grief process. I couldn't put it down. It was wonderful. And that was for companioning through bereavement during pregnancy loss. And that was sparked after my own experience with loss, not only with miscarriage, but with my mom, and just realizing, wow, we're so focused on life, but what about the other threshold to life? Because just like with birth and being over-medicalized and over-pathologized, so is the other threshold of life. It's over-medicalized, over-pathologized, and there's no ceremony surrounding it in the Eastern culture, Western culture. And even outside of ceremony, nobody knows their rights. And there's a lot of really, how do I want to say that, really constrictive language surrounding it. So when I'm working with parents who are either expecting loss or who have just gone through loss, I'm trying to use language that is, instead of saying miscarriage, it's birth in the first trimester, because I think that, and also, there's a lot of parents that are having early miscarriages or birthing in the first trimester or the second trimester, and there's this whole 3-month mark where, don't tell anybody you're pregnant until 12 weeks so that you don't have to go through, you hear I'm going with that, so you don't have to go through telling everybody you lost your baby. But that isolates families so much, so all of a sudden, they feel like they can't talk to anybody because of some really estranged idea that that's something that shouldn't be discussed. And in my bereavement training, we also read a book, oh my goodness, who's the author's name? It's called Ghost Belly, and it's by Elizabeth Heinemann. And
I've been meaning to read that one. I gotta get that.
I could not put it down either. Yeah, I couldn't. I'll send it to you, but I could not put that down either. And it's all about a woman who had a stillbirth. And then, I guess the funeral director, the funeral home, was about a block away from her house, and the funeral director told her, you can take your baby home. She's like, what? And this just goes to show nobody really knows their rights or what they can do with their deceased loved ones, and especially their deceased babies. So if they're having a stillbirth, and also bereavement in the childbearing year also includes, infant death. So maybe not a stillbirth, but maybe a very young baby. That still applies as well. So part of my work that I'm doing is really becoming educated, in the laws of where I'm at. So in Costa Rica, understanding the laws here about what happens whenever a child dies or whenever a mom has a birth in the first or second or third trimester, or infant death, and even adult death as well. And then also in the States, what are the policies? And then, learning what is policy and what is law, because they're not the same thing. Because a lot of times people are, just like in the birth world, they're told like, well, this is hospital policy. And because there's this like big P word, they don't realize, well, that's not you have more rights than that. So what I'm trying to do is really kind of expand this revolutionary idea around, rewilding birth and also rewilding death, because we're all kind of sliding into home base without having any idea what we're sliding into. And I think that that's really sad that all of us are going to die. And none of us know what we're going to do there.
Yeah, even what you're saying about, of course, birth and death, there's so much to say to the entrance and the exit. And of course, we all have to move into that next phase at some point. We all die. And when it comes to, even just, miscarriage or even stillbirth or even later loss, there are a lot of, grief and emotions take over, and people just kind of don't know where those legalities are, ethical things and, formalities. And it is definitely state to state. I know a lot about California because I live here and I'm also studying death. So I'm informed. I'm like, oh, there are a lot. As you're saying, there actually are a lot of things we're allowed to do. We're allowed in California. You're allowed to take anybody home, and there's a way to do a home funeral, and or especially with it, we know with babies. I feel like they've, there's so much around. Babies do need to come home and be with their family in that usually most people like a 3-day period to be with the body. And I feel like from what I see is that I feel like it has to do with really seeing the separation of soul and body, that there is that grieving, that time. And those that have experienced, taking baby home, washing baby, preparing baby, and, burying or cremating was very, powerful for the releasing and having to move now into that next piece of life without and seeing so much more that is built around it. And so it is unfortunate that people don't know that. And you're right, you do have to know what is the state, what do they say? And is it the funeral parlors? Is it like where, because the funeral industry we know is taken over. And even as you say, birth and death, it's very institutionalized, very medicalized, and so is death. And it's quite interesting to see that. And I think it's such a gift that you get to be a birth doula that has not only, the joys of birth and life, but also the sorrow and sadness of bereavement. It makes sense. I feel like as Amy Glenn, she speaks a lot about those kind of collaborative ends, right? And how important that is, because there is a lot of women that are isolated, like what you were saying in miscarriage. I see tons of women in miscarriage more recently than before. It's just, what is this and how are we now being with grief and holding the space together, that it's okay to have those feelings, and it's okay to cry, even if your baby was 2 weeks, you gave birth, or if the baby was, 10 weeks, it doesn't matter. It's still a loss, and it's still a connection that happens.
It's still a huge loss. And, I think another thing that really, I've seen several friends go through, loss and early stages or second trimester. And I witnessed a friend who, I witnessed her process as she was miscarrying. And I thought that it was really beautiful because she just started cleaning her house and just made everything really beautiful. She was nesting, and then she passed her baby, and she didn't realize that she was about to pass her baby. She realized the next day when she went to the hospital, but I in retrospect, I saw her preparing herself, and just that really internal knowing. And on the other flip side, I've seen a friend who was going into her first day of work and was 17 weeks and passed her baby in the toilet and flushed it, and could not miss her first day of work because of this culture that we live in that's if you don't come to work, you're going to lose everything. And I think as a bereavement and a death doula, part of our work is to be a hand to hold and a voice kind of outside of that chaotic internal turmoil that says, hey, you can slow down, and hey, you know, you can look at your baby, and hey, you can look at this blood, you can hold it in your hand. Like, you don't have to pass it into the toilet and be afraid of it, you know, like you could pass it into your hand, you could hold it if that's comfortable for you, and just really giving permission to families to sit with that process, because it's so often swept under the rug. And that's really just, it's damaging to people's nervous systems, like on a basic scientific level. When people are going through these traumatic experiences and then they don't process them, they end up in this kind of trauma loop, you know, and that affects subsequent birth, subsequent, you know, intimate experiences. It affects their parenting of the children that they already have. So I think that everybody really deserves support people.
I know, that's so great. I know, because there was that, you know, I know there was talk, you know, amongst the birthing community. I've heard talking about that bereavement doula, but what does that look like? You know, do they come out to your home, and maybe it's counseling on the phone, maybe it's grief? Can you speak about that? What would a bereavement doula do if, let's say, you weren't, you know, in the whole process of the birth? Like, somebody could just call you and say, oh, you know, you're not my birth doula, but I need support when it comes to, you know, birthing, you know, this loss. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. Okay. And I can hear kind of different questions coming out of that, so I'll try to touch on a few of them. And so that can look different ways. And of course, every birth keeper, every bereavement doula is going to you know, offer herself in whatever way she feels comfortable. But for me, I'm a writer, so I really love to write. So whatever I do, I always create writing exercises for my clients. So I've had people call me online, because I'm a virtual doula also. So I've had people call me online who are just gone through, who have doulas, birth doulas that are not experienced in bereavement, maybe training doulas, or just have never been through any kind of loss. And so they seek me out. And what I do is I help them, whether or not I'm online or whether I'm local to them. I always offer writing exercises, because writing is really cathartic. It's a way to move energy up and out of our body and onto something that's physical that we can see and process without having it kind of ping-ponging around in our bodies. And which really kind of the greatest therapy is having a sounding board and somebody to listen to. And I learned a lot from Amy's training, because she talked about kind of just reflective listening and not so much giving so much advice, but listening for the moments and the words and the phrases that there's a lot of emotion hanging on the end of, and grabbing onto that and saying, okay, I hear you saying this. Can you tell me more about that? And really just allowing people and giving people talking points for them to build off of. So being a bereavement doula is so much listening for me. It's really being able to intuitively perceive where there's a lot of emotion around somebody's words, and then reflecting that back to them and asking them to elaborate. And when I'm local to somebody, yes, absolutely, if that's what they're seeking. Some women are not seeking that, or dads. I've not had a dad write me yet, but I have worked with them. And, oh, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm listening.
Are we still connected? Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah, we're still connected. I know. People are going to be like, oh, what's happening? We're, you know, technical issues at times keep us showing up on this particular podcast. But no, yeah, that's good to check in, make sure.
Perfect. So, you know, if I'm local to somebody, I absolutely, if they're comfortable and if that's what they are seeking out, I will go to their house. And because I'm a ritualist, we usually engage in some kind of ritual. So whatever that feels like for me in the moment, generally I bring writing tools and some matches and a ceremonial bowl, maybe I have a Shruti box that my husband lets me use. And that's really kind of like a harmonium. And so it really just sets the tone for bringing us back down, into our bodies, because people that are going through loss are spending a lot of time in their minds. And that can be detrimental because they're replaying something over and over again, not giving themselves the space to feel into something. So whatever I can do, just like in the birth process, because really they're one and the same, you know, when we're grieving something, we're birthing an entirely new person of ourselves, like an entirely new identity. I think that you can agree that grief turns us, it evolves us, you know. And so whatever I can do to help bring these families back into their bodies and allow their minds a little bit of space to just kind of rest. And ritual really, when we have babies or when we just are living in this culture in general, there's not a lot of ritual surrounding anything, and ritual gives us this safe container to process in. So when I'm going to people's houses, we are maybe burying their placenta. So that's when another placenta work comes in there. Like if it's a late term baby and there's like a viable placenta, we'll do some ritual with their placenta if they're not ingesting it. And really we can do ritual with their placenta along with ingesting it. Like if it's a stillbirth or if it's a third trimester birth or wherever, or maybe like an infant loss, we will maybe bury it in a plant, and whatever plant reminds them of their baby, or if they have their own property, plant a tree like we were talking about earlier, so that they can kind of see the fruit of their child's life as the years go by. And then they can show that to their children, and that becomes, you know, something that they do with their kids every year, you know, or maybe just their partner if they don't have children, somewhere that they can go back that's not just like a grave site. So really it looks so many different ways, and it's very intuitive based. And it really just depends on the family and what I see their needs are and what I see their lifestyle is and what I see maybe their spiritual or religious preferences too. I learned a lot from Amy Wright Glenn's work just as a hospital chaplain, which is something else I'd love to go into, just being really well informed on people's spiritual desires and how I can cater to that.
As you're saying that, my mind's going, so is that like the entrance keeper and then the gatekeeper to the end of the tunnel, the beginning of the tunnel, like this, you know, this birth and death. And I really love like how doulas are kind of taking over the energy of like, oh, it's just not about birth, but like there's that full spectrum or that whole other piece that is very challenging. We know death-phobic culture, death, you know, what is this death thing? I don't want to look at it. I don't want to be a part of it. I don't want to talk about it. And then you step into it and go, okay, well, I'll show up and talk about it and be present with it.
Yeah, you know, it's uncomfortable and that's okay. And, you know, again, it kind of goes with this culture of anything that's uncomfortable, throw a pill at it or smoke it away or drink it away or eat it away, you know, and don't, you know, feel the emotion behind it. And I do think that's a very Eastern thing. I'm sorry, I keep saying Eastern, but I mean Western. Now that I'm on the West Coast, I'm getting confused. But it's a very Western thing. And, you know, there in other cultures, in Eastern cultures, there you can tell how close the people are to the deceased person by how loud they wail. I can't remember exactly who. You may know.
Interesting.
Yeah, but you can tell that because they have these wailing ceremonies. And so, you know, I really believe in vocalization if a parent is comfortable with it during the birth process. And I think it's just as important whenever somebody has passed too. Like we are in this really vocally, which is, you know, the throat chakra, really, really truth and vocalized, suppressed culture. And so that's also part of what I offer is vocalizing with parents and allowing parents the space to wail and to cry and not be put off by it and to say, and it's really like, you know, when you see parents breaking through that, they really settle into a wailing, and afterwards it's like all of this energy is cleared, and it's a really beautiful thing. You see it in birth as well. You may have experienced it, just wailing and getting that out moves that energy up and out of the body, and it makes space for something new.
It's
so and I think, you know, with doulas, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No.
Oh,
Go ahead. You go ahead first. Go.
I was just going to say, like with doulas, like I see, you know, with lots of birth doulas, a lot of, I really think that it's important for all doulas to take some kind of bereavement training, you know, even if they're not going to be bereavement doulas, just for themselves, because we're also, if they're in the middle of a birth and a baby dies, or a mother dies, which is, not as common in a physiological birth, but it can happen, and it does happen, especially in the medical model because of all the interventions that are unnecessary. And I think that it's important for birth keepers to go through that training in order to support themselves, because we can't support others if we can't support ourselves. So I think overall it's a really important facet of keeping these different thresholds.
Yeah, I know before I was I get these thoughts that rise in my mind, and I go, ooh, let me kind of explore that, and let me look at that. But you were sharing, about, I forgot. I'm like, my mind's like, wait, what was this piece I was going to go into? It's just about the, having, the doula community, birth professionals to really pull in this bereavement piece. It feels like to be the greatest of service, even though it is quite frightening and it brings up a lot of stuff for people. And even, because I do know I've seen, like, in my community, there's posts in a lot of these professional pages where they're like, a baby died, I don't know what to do, and these doulas are panicking, because I think they probably teach you, it sounds like they teach only a tiny little piece, but they maybe don't go very deep into what that really is about and what that means for yourself, because it does begin with the individual, because you're going in there and being of service and holding space in a certain way for the birthing family. And I almost feel like I wonder why it wouldn't be more pushed and required, but I do know, because death-phobic culture is very uncomfortable and confused by what this collective energy is. And at the same time, there are doulas like you, and doula and so much more, I should say, than a doula, but doing all these different things to bring in that understanding and that connection of community. Oh, yeah, this is good. Yeah. So much to share about the placenta.
Thank you so much.
Postpartum, but I'd love for you to also just share any upcoming things that you have going on. I love that you said you're a traveling birth, person. So you must travel and teach or do workshops, or maybe you meet with clients.
Yeah. So part of what I offer, I was really blessed with the opportunity to come to Costa Rica via a friend turned client, but always a friend, who came to Costa Rica to have her baby, and she was seeking postpartum support, and so she flew me to Costa Rica. And about 6 months after, I got laid off from my job, which was serendipitous, because that morning I woke up and I said, I don't want to work this anymore. I want to do what I love. And that morning I got laid off. So, and 6 months later I was in Costa Rica. This was back in 2017. And I have one child that's in the States, and he lives with his dad. And so for 8 months out of the year, I am here in Costa Rica and in other countries, and whatever other countries I'm called to. And then for 4 months out of the year, during the summer months, I'm in the States. And because I've got this kind of free-flowing ability to move around now, and a husband that supports me that's also a traveler, and really travel-savvy kids, I'm able to serve wherever I'm called to. So I was called actually back to serve in the States by my doula, who first encapsulated my placenta pro bono. She did a barter and trade with me, which really started my birth keeping journey. She needed assistance in her postpartum time and flew me back into the States. So I'm just kind of being flown around and assisting parents where they need me. And, I see parents really kind of getting into this. They're really waking up to the fact that, people spend thousands and thousands of dollars on weddings, and really we should be spending thousands and thousands of dollars, maybe not that much, but whatever we can, really investing in our birth experience,
Oh, of course,
and
definitely.
And so I've created a life where my cost of living is really low. So I'm able to serve in different communities and on a sliding scale and online, and I can just be available whenever anybody needs me. So right now I'm in Costa Rica, but I will be coming back in November for the holidays, and I will be doing some placenta encapsulation, or just placenta. Really, I just do placenta workshops for expecting parents that are free to the community. And I also do other workshops on how to choose your provider, because that's so vital in our birth experience. I think that's really one of the most vital aspects for people who are having assisted births. And then I do workshops on creating your birth team otherwise, and all of the emotional aspects of birth. I do writing workshops and matrescent circles. So what that is just like becoming a mother. The word matrescence is just the evolution from maiden to mother. Do circles, like sacred circles surrounding that, allowing a safe container for people to express what they're going through. So I'm doing all of those in November and December and January. And here in Costa Rica, I attend Envision Festival, and I speak at the Red Tent, and I talk about rewilding birth and reclaiming and rehumanizing the birth process. And I'll be holding placenta professional trainings here in October, and I also am going to be creating an online program for birth keepers and people, even if they don't work. Like, I found that a lot of women are wanting to do placenta encapsulation or placenta professional work because they want to be in the birth world, but they can't leave their young kids. So that's something that they're really, starting, that's kind of like a foot in for them. So I offered trainings for that. And really just whatever people need. So that's what I'm doing. I kind of wait for things to come up like this, and then I feel into it and see if it's good for me. And if it is, then I say yes.
Wonderful. Can you share your website as well and ways that people can contact you?
Yeah, so the best way to contact me is through my website. There's a contact form on there, and that's directly related to my email, and that's www.jamiesatori.com. So it's JAMIESATORI.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much for educating us and loving us and sharing all of the amazing things that you're doing. Thank you for being a guest on Spirit Baby Radio podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope that all of the different little connection issues haven't been too bad, and thank you guys for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
I know, I feel like the connection issues, I kept going, she's in the jungle somewhere. I think of the jungle, like, where's the signal?
We don't even have addresses. Yeah, we don't even have addresses. It's just like, I'm on this side of the mountain right past the valley and to the right of the river. So I am pretty out here, but I appreciate you taking the time and being patient with our connection issues, and I hope that this turns out really well.
Yes, thank you. I know it's been wonderful to connect and meet, and I'm so sure it's so gorgeous in the jungle over there. But thank you again. Yeah. And thank you for joining episode 68, Supporting Conscious Birthing and the Forgotten Organ, the Placenta. If you like my podcast, please subscribe and leave reviews.
This is Spirit Baby Radio. Thank you for joining Kelly in the energy of awareness, love, healing, and soul communication. Please join the next episode at www.soulbabycommunication.com.